Hey legends, in this video I'm going to show you how you can automatically review all of your Voiceflow transcripts so that you get an Airtable that looks like this, that has the actual transcript ID, so you can actually go to Voiceflow and find the transcript, has the date that it was created, and then over here we've got 4 columns where we're using an OpenAI structured output to actually review the conversation and summarize the chat transcript, categorize it into a predefined list of contact reasons, then let us know if it was actually resolved or not resolved. And then finally here, recommend any missing content or missing steps from the actual chat. So if I actually just look at this last row here and I open it up, this customer is requesting information about the status of their order, which was expected to arrive yesterday, but has not arrived yet. So the category was shipping and orders, which is correct. Then we also have unresolved status. So if we look at what the missing content suggestion was, let's open this up. If we provided tracking information or confirmation of the order status and expected delivery date. So it looks like our flow doesn't actually do this right now. So this will be a really good action item for this week for me to go out and build a order tracking flow in my chatbot. Hey guys, for those of you that are new to my channel, my name is Bart, and for the last 10 years, I've been working with my 3 older brothers on building up a global e-commerce brand. And for like the last year and a half, I taught myself how to code and use low code, no code tools. So now I work with businesses or AI agencies building out custom scripts, custom web apps, or even custom automation using low code, no code tools. So if you're a business owner and you want to work with me, I've left my contact information in the description of this video. Okay, let's get back to it. So the tools we'll be using are make.com for the primary automation. We'll be using Voiceflow to, yes, get the actual transcripts, but also to run some custom JavaScript for us, because we can run JavaScript in make.com, but we have to pay for the module. And since we already have Voiceflow, we may as well just use this. Then we'll be using an Airtable to store all the reviewed chats. And finally, we'll be using OpenAI's structured outputs to actually review the chat for us. So I'll link another video somewhere here where I go over how to use the structured outputs in make.com. So if you want to learn a little bit more about this, you can just watch that video. So before we get into the swing of things, the first thing I'm going to do is just give you an overview of the entire flow so that when we're building out in make.com, everything makes sense to you. And then while we're building out the flow in make.com, I'll also let you know which Voiceflow APIs we're using and how to adjust them to your needs. And then I'll also explain how to connect make.com to Voiceflow in order to process this custom JavaScript step. Okay, so let's start by going over the entire flow. So in Voiceflow, you can click on this transcripts button, and then it opens up a list of transcripts. So these are all just conversations that people have had with your chatbot. And then in this panel here is the actual conversation from the chat. So you can scroll through and you can actually read up about what's going on in here. So if you wanted to review these manually, you'd come into here, review the back and forth conversation, and then make your own summary in a table. So Voiceflow has 2 really cool API calls. The first is this fetch project transcripts API call, which gives us a list of project transcripts. So just the ID of the transcript. And the other cool feature is against a certain time range. So we can filter it by today only, yesterday, last 7 days, last 30 days, or all time. So if you want to set this each day, you would just choose the filter range of each day. If you want to do this every week, you would just choose the last 7 days, for example. And then this would only return the list of transcripts from that period of time. So for the last 7 days. Then the second API call you would do is this get transcript dialog. So after you get the list of transcript IDs, you then run them through this specific API call. And then your API response is the actual entire conversation string from Voiceflow. So for example, this would be that first API call where you get the actual IDs of the transcript. And then this would be the second API call where you dig into the specific transcript ID and you pull out the actual conversation. So this is the automation in make.com. I'll break it down at a high level, then we'll kind of dig into it step by step. So the first thing we're doing is making that API call to Voiceflow to get the list of transcript IDs. We're then going to iterate over each of those transcript IDs and then make another API call to Voiceflow to get the transcript dialog. So those are the 2 API calls that we're speaking about. After we get the transcript dialog, which is a pretty long and messy string, we're converting it into a validated JSON format so we can plug it into an API call. This API call goes across to Voiceflow where we have a custom JavaScript step that's going to process that long string, which is not really human readable, and turn it into something like nice and front facing. So it's going to iterate through and pull out the user message, agent message, user message, agent message, then get rid of all the back-end messy information that we don't need. So after we get the nicely formatted transcript dialog from Voiceflow, we then send it across to a ChatGPT completion step to review for us. We then parse out the information we need from this ChatGPT completion API call, and then we add the information to an Airtable. And just like we saw before, this is the information that we get. So the ChatGPT completion step, this actually gives us the summary, it categorizes the ticket, lets us know if it was resolved or not, and then suggests some content for us to create. Okay, so that was the entire flow. So I think now we have a pretty good overview of exactly what we're building. So let's actually get back into make.com and start building this out. So I'm going to leave this make.com flow here, and then I'm going to be building out the exact same thing directly underneath. All right, so our first module is going to be a HTTP call. So I'm going to go here, scroll down and find make a request. So let's click that. So let's not worry about connecting it right now. So the first API call we're making is the fetch project transcripts API call. So if you wanted to, you can actually just put your project ID into here, and then your Voiceflow API key into here. And then you can choose what time range you want to work with as well. So for example, if you choose yesterday, this will give you all the transcripts from yesterday's time period. Then you would go into here and put your project ID, which in Voiceflow, if we go to our settings, scroll down, and this is your project ID that you'll put into there. But the main thing I want to show you is this range. So when you put yesterday, for example, if you then go into here and just scroll across, so I'm going to scroll, it actually embeds the range into the API call for you. So back in make.com, let's open up this API call. So you can see I'm using that exact same API call. I put my project ID into here already, and then my range is the last 7 days, mainly because I don't have a lot of conversations in this specific Voiceflow assistant. Then we select the get method. Our authorization is the Voiceflow API key, which if you don't know what that is, let's go across to this integrations tab, and then you can just copy your API key here. So once you paste in your API key, the next header is this accept header for application JSON, and then make sure you set your API response to parse. Okay, so because this is a pretty basic API call, I'm just going to clone this, delete this old API call, and bring it across here. Now I'm going to take this and bring it to this API call, and now it's going to denote this as my start module for this automation. So a quick note here, if we click this open, we can actually run the scenario at different intervals. So I've got this on demand right now because I just want to trigger it live when I'm showing you guys. So the way that you would do this is you would couple this schedule setting with whatever range you put here. So for example, if you put range as yesterday, you would come here and just choose every day. So now this would run every 24 hours. And then thanks to the setting in the Voiceflow API call, you pull out the information from the previous 24 hours. So once again, I'm just going to put this as on demand for my own scenario. Okay, so now let's give this a run and see what comes out. So let's go to our output bundle and go into data. So this data set represents 4 separate transcript IDs. And if I click into one of them, you can see this is the transcript ID that we then want to feed into our API call to get the transcript dialog. Now, since we actually have 4 of these transcript IDs, we need to iterate over each transcript ID, then get the transcript dialog, then get AI to review it, and then add it to an Airtable. So to do that, we need an iterator module, which is this. So let's go and create an iterator module. Let's go to flow control and click iterator. Okay, so let's get the data into here. Now the data that we want to iterate over is this data array here. So we're just going to click on this. Now we don't want to make the mistake of actually going into the data and then clicking on this ID tab, because if we did that, we would only pull out this specific ID tab. This is a single item. Whereas here with the square brackets, this is an array. So it's going to have the collection of items. So let's click OK. Now the next thing we want to do is make another API call across to Voiceflow to actually get the transcript dialog. So let's click on make a request. So back in Voiceflow, let's go to get transcript dialog. So once again, you would put your project ID here, and then you can put your transcript ID here. And the transcript ID, this is the actual ID that we just received from our first API call. So we set our Voiceflow API URL here. This specific number is our project ID. And then this variable is the iterated transcript ID from this API call. We're using the get method. We've then got our authorization and our Voiceflow API key. Once again, we're accepting application JSON. And this time we want to make sure that we set the API response to no. We don't want to parse the API response. So I'm just going to delete this module and clone this again because it's pretty basic. And I'll bring it down here. The only thing I need to do is actually remove this and replace it with our value from our module. So that's over here. Now let's click OK. Okay, so now let's run the scenario and see what happens. And there you go. You can see that I've iterated across 4 of the transcript IDs. If I open this up, I've got 1, 2, 3, 4 transcript dialogues. If I open this up again and go to this data tab, and this is the entire string that we're dealing with. As you can see, it's super, super long, and it has a bunch of information here like turn ID, time, block ID, all this stuff that we don't actually need. So now our next step is to convert all this into a validated JSON string so that we can send it in an API call to Voiceflow. So we're going to be using a transform to JSON module. So let's go next module, go to JSON, scroll down and click transform to JSON. Now the information that we want to put into here is going to be the data from the previous API call. So let's click that and let's hit save. Now the next thing we want to do is actually make the API call across to Voiceflow. So in Voiceflow's API documentation, we would have to use this interact API endpoint. Now what we would normally have to do is create a launch request first, so make one API call, and then make another API call, as a text request to actually pass some information into our flow. We're going to be doing something a little bit more specific over here. So we're just going to be using one API call. So let's dig into this. We're using the same API endpoint from what we just saw. We'll be making a post request. We're then going to have authorization header and then content type application JSON header. Then we're going to feed in which version of our chat we want to actually interact with. So I'm going to go for the production version. Now, if you don't know what version you're working with, let's go to the settings tab and then click on environments. And then you can see that over here, I've got my development version, but my production version is actually live. So then you're going to put production into here. Make sure that it's a lowercase p for production, or if you're using development, lowercase d as well. Now let's scroll down and we're going to be sending a body with this API call. So we're going to go for a raw body that's application JSON content type. And this is the actual payload that we're sending. So this is the actual payload that we're sending. Now, you don't need to know too much about this, but basically what we're going to be doing is we're going to be targeting an intent within our Voiceflow canvas, and we're going to be sending a query onto the canvas, which is essentially going to be a last utterance that contains the transcript dialog. And this is that JSON formatted string from this previous step here. And then the final thing to note is that yes, we want to parse the API response. Okay, so to set this up in Voiceflow, let's go across to Voiceflow and go to our canvas, workflows. So the home tab is actually where I have my main conversation, but then you can actually isolate this JavaScript step for make.com in a separate workflow. So it's not interrupting with your main flow. To do that, let's go to create new workflow. I'm just going to say new workflow, click create workflow. Okay, so on the canvas, now we have this trigger step. So what you want to do is click this trigger step, and on the right-hand side panel, you want to go plus, and then you're going to go to create intent. So back in make.com, I'm going to zoom in. You're going to insert this receive underscore intent. So you would just copy this and then you would paste it into the name here. So let's paste it in. And then you're also going to paste it into the utterance over here. So let's paste it in. And now let's click create intent. Okay, awesome. So that's step one done. So when we send this API call, now we're targeting that specific trigger, which is receive intent, and we're dumping in this payload. So this query basically says that, hey, in that trigger step, just give this payload. So now we're assuming that over here, we're just receiving a last utterance. So the next thing we need to do with that last utterance is we want to process it using JavaScript. So we're going to go down to dev and choose JavaScript. I want to link you to my GitHub repo, but we're going to go to repositories, Voiceflow transcript JavaScript, then click on this function. And we're just going to copy and paste all this stuff. Now let's go into this JavaScript step and paste it into here. So let's expand this and see what's going on. So the first thing we're doing is we're setting a new variable, which is parsing the last utterance. So the last utterance is the JSON string we just got from make.com. So we're parsing it first so we can access the variables. We're then creating some new variables so we can actually store the conversation within it. And then this function here is basically going through that crazy string that we saw before in make.com and pulling out each agent message and each customer message and then outputting it in a very nice HTML format. And then finally, we're saving that nicely formatted transcript into a variable called transcript. So now you just need to copy this and add it as a variable to your Voiceflow workspace. So you would copy this, let's go back, let's go variables, new variable, paste it into here, and then click create variable. But I got an error because my variable already exists. So back on the canvas, now we just want to return the transcript variable that was processed in this JavaScript step back to make.com. So we're going to go to create a new path, go for a talk step, send a message, and over here, we're just going to insert that variable. So I'm going to go squiggly bracket, I'm going to start typing in transcript and then hit enter. Now I'm going to hit publish, click publish. Now you have to publish your flow. So it goes into the production mode. So when you're targeting with API calls, you're actually targeting the right flow. Okay, so that's all good. Now back in make.com, I'm just going to clone this as well. I'm going to bring it down here and join it up. Now what I have to edit is this JSON string. I have to use our JSON module. So I'm going to backspace this and I'm going to put in this string. Now a quick note, you can see that pretty much all of my key values here, they all have these quotation marks around them, except this JSON string. This doesn't need quotation marks because the string itself already has quotation marks inside it. Let's hit OK. And now the next thing we want to do is make this ChatGPT completion API call. So let's see what's going on in here. We're using the ChatGPT completions API endpoint. We're making a post request. I've got the authorization as my bearer API key, content type, application JSON, and then scrolling down, I've got a raw body with content type application JSON. Then I've got my actual body here. Okay, so I've copied the body into a Word document. It might not be the prettiest, but you could probably screenshot this and then get ChatGPT to write it out for you again. So to go over this, we're setting our model for the ChatGPT completions. We're then establishing our system role. And we're just saying, hey, you're an AI system that summarizes chat transcripts and you do this X, Y, and Z function. And the X, Y, and Z function is whatever you want it to be. But for my case, I've got summarize a transcript, let us know if it was solved or not. and then let us know what was missing from the conversation. We're then setting the user role to be the content of the Voiceflow API response. So this is that user role here, and that content, which I'll show you how to actually build into here in a second, is just the API response from the Voiceflow API call. So this is that JavaScript processed transcript, which is nicely formatted. And then we're establishing that we want this response from the ChatGPT completion step to be a JSON schema. We're setting strict as true, so it must be a JSON schema with these specific properties, which is this. So ticket summary, which we want it to be a string with a brief description of the ticket. Then we want is resolved, which is was the ticket resolved or not. It's going to be a Boolean, which is a yes or no value, letting us know if the ticket was resolved or not. Then we have missing content suggestion, which is a string that lets us know if there's anything missing from the actual conversation. And finally, we have ticket category, which is the contact reason of the ticket, which we predefine here to be either a general question, shipping and orders, product issues, and refund and RMA. So if you wanted to change this for yourself and you wanted to use different contact reasons, you would just change them directly in here. And then finally, we say that, hey, the output that we're expecting from you is all of those specific properties. And once again, those specific properties are summarize a ticket, categorize a ticket, let us know if it was resolved or not, and then suggest any missing content. So that's super cool because that one API call to the ChatGPT completion step actually gives us data for all 4 of those columns. All right, so I'm gonna copy this API call and put it into here. But before I do that, I'm just gonna hit run on this scenario so I can start getting some variables filled out into this transform to JSON step and then this API call. So I'm gonna need the variable from here to plug into this API call when I clone it. So I'm gonna hit run once. Awesome, now we have some variables here and here. So we can clone this. Let's bring it here and connect it up. Now let's click into this API call. Let's scroll down, and where it says content, we're just gonna backspace this. And now we're gonna input the content from this API call by accessing the data here. Click on payload, and then click on message. Awesome, and now we have our content needed for the user role for our API call. Once again, this is the JavaScript processed information, which is gonna be in that really nice format. So my next step is to actually parse the variables from here so that I can access the individual variables and then plug them into my Airtable. So before I duplicate this again, I'm just gonna hit run so I can get some variables into here. Awesome, so I've got some variables in here. Let's see what we've got. Let's go to data, choices, one, message. And here we have the actual response from the ChatGPT completion, which includes all 4 of those variables. So this is what we actually wanna parse with the JSON module. So let's go add a new module. Let's go JSON and parse JSON. And now let's enter in that string. So let's go choices, message, and then content. Let's paste it into there. Now let's hit OK. But before we move on, we actually want to create a new data structure that is specific for this data set. So I'm going to go into here, go to operation, data, choices, one, message. I'm just going to copy this ChatGPT completion output, go back into this parse module, create a new data structure. Then I'm going to hit generate and paste in the data structure that I just copied and then click generate. And now I'm going to hit save. So now my data structure matches the exact JSON string that I'm inputting. So let's click OK. And once again, I'm going to run this module. So now I'm going to have access to all 4 of those AI generated reviews. So I can plug it into my Airtable. So I'm going to click run once and run anyway. Awesome, finished processing. Let's open it up, click on operation 1. And now you can see that this original JSON string is now broken down into key value pairs of ticket summary, if it's resolved or not, missing content, and ticket category. So our next step is to introduce an Airtable module. And let's go to create record. I've already got my Airtable synced up into here, so I'm just going to choose my options. So it's my Zendesk base, and my table is transcript reviews. And now I'm going to fill out each of these records one by one. So for transcript ID, I'm going to scroll all the way to the bottom, and I'm going to insert the ID from the flow control. For created, I'm going to scroll all the way to the bottom and also choose the created app from the flow control. For the summary, we're going to be using the ticket summary from the previous module that we just used. For category, we're going to go with this ticket category again from the previous JSON parse module. Then resolved is going to be this, and suggested content will be this. All right, and let's hit OK. All right, so that's it. We've actually built out the flow. Now I'm going to hit run once, then I'm going to go across to Airtable and watch those rows come in live. So let's go run once. And now in Airtable, we'll see these rows get more and more populated with the next transcripts. Awesome. Okay, so that was the entire flow built out. If you enjoyed this video, please like and subscribe to my page. Drop a comment for what other content you'd like to see next. Now, if you're a business owner and you want this kind of solution built out for you, or something a little bit more sophisticated and personalized, then please reach out to me. I've left my contact information in the description of this video. All right, thanks guys. See ya.